So, good evening, everybody. I'm Patricia Camilleri, President of the Archaeological Society, Society Malta. The ASM and the Department of Classics and Archaeology at the university are delighted, as always, to see you again. Got a nice group in our audience today, despite the fact that Facebook didn't want to boost something that had in its title climate change. It refused to boost, to create the advertisement, which I found annoying, but sort of slightly bizarre and amusing at the same time. So I'm glad to see that we have a nice group this evening. All lectures are this season a collaboration between the Department of Classics and Archaeology at the University of Malta and the Archaeological Society Malta. And thanks, as always, to Dr. John C. Betts and to Professor Nicholas Bella, ASM Vice President. Ms. Sharon Sultana will be delivering this evening's lecture, which is entitled Climate Change and Cultural Heritage, Connecting the Past, Present and Future. As always, I will be introducing Sharon, then turning the virtual floor over to her. Questions can be asked on the chat, and you'll find access to the chat at the bottom, at the top of your screens, anywhere, anytime during the talk. I'll ask Sharon to answer some of those questions, at least as many queries as time really allows. You're asked to kindly mute yourselves during the talk. Use of your own video is, of course, optional. And I'd like to say again that this talk is going to be recorded. So let's move on with a brief bio of tonight's speaker. Sharon Sultana is the Senior Curator of the National Museum of Archaeology in Valletta here in Malta. Upon her graduation from the University of Malta in 1995 with a first degree in archaeology, she started her career at the National Museum of Archaeology. She also has a master's in cultural heritage management and is particularly interested in attracting and retaining diverse audiences by facilitating access to collections both on a physical and an intellectual level. She has recently participated in fora which relate to climate change and cultural heritage and would like to raise more public awareness concerning this field. And this evening's lecture is obviously born of that interest. She has also, of course, curated a number of exhibitions, both locally and overseas. So I'd just like to pass the floor over to you, Sharon. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Just before I start, I would like to point out that if at any point in time I go offline, please bear with me for a few seconds, because sometimes Meta does that to us when we're working after hours. So it will just take a few seconds for me to go back online. So why climate change and cultural heritage? When I was approached by Anne to give a presentation for the Archaeological Society, I had just finished a 2-day online meeting, which was about strengthening cultural heritage resilience for climate change. This was one of many meetings spread over 2 years as part of a cooperation framework for experts of the EU member states to deal with issues that climate change poses regarding the preservation of the European cultural heritage. I will not go into the reason as to how I ended up as part of this focus group, because I still, to date, do not know how I ended up as part of this focus group. But I must say that this opportunity has opened my eyes to view things differently. So before I proceed, I would like to stress that I am no expert in the subject, but I will do my best to convey what I have learned so far vis-à-vis climate change and cultural heritage. In past presentations, even for the Archaeological Society, my colleagues from Heritage Malta have given a number of presentations with regard to sites which we manage and the impact that climate change is having on such sites. So I will not dwell too much on that aspect. I will just skim through a few slides as sort of as a refresher. So here we're seeing Shroplagine. Shroplagine is between Munxar, St. Thomas Bay, Marsa Scala, and Marsa Xlokk. When it was discovered, as you can see on the plan on the right-hand side of the screen, the megalithic remains had already suffered from cliff erosion, and part of the site had already fallen into the sea. The site is on top of the cave that you can see in the slide. And currently, my colleagues from Heritage Malta, David Cardona and Katja Strauss, together with their teams, are currently re-excavating the site in order to evaluate the next steps. They need to be constantly harnessed and supported by an on-site crane since there is a risk of site collapse. This slide is showing us Fort del Mara, which is literally perched on the cliff. This fort was built to guard and protect the southeastern harbor and seas. Those same seas which are causing irreparable damage to the cliff face which the fort sits on. This is causing issues to the stability of the site. As you can see in these two images, there was a large piece of rock which is visible in the 2010 image, but which collapsed by 2014. Just as I was preparing this presentation last week on St. Paul's Feast, which was bang in the middle of last week's storm, I started receiving a number of WhatsApp messages. People, look what is happening to your head office. That's Kalkara, that's Bigi. It's where Heritage Malta's head office is sited. And yes, part of the historic boundary wall collapsed. It has been assessed by our architects and safety officers. It will cost quite a bit to repair that because it's the rocks which have basically given way. So we have vouched that we will obviously repair it. We're trying to source now the funding for it. This is Ramla Bay, Ramla al-Hamra. It's the Roman villa in Gozo. Even though the site does not fall under the responsibility of Heritage Malta, I thought it would still, be appropriate to show this slide. The ruins of this villa were excavated in the early 20th century by Thomas Ashby and Sir Temiz Mead. The works uncovered the remains of an extensive private leisure house built at the water's edge, obviously dating to the Roman period. It included rooms connected with a private bath, and obviously it shows that the house was built for quite a wealthy person. At that point in time, the remains were covered over by sand immediately after the excavations, but its location inevitably makes it very prone to deterioration due to atmospheric forces. Of particular damaging nature is seaward due to the removal of sand during rough seas, and also inland erosion due to the removal of sand during water coming down from the nearby valley during heavy rains. On the other hand, we have our megalithic prehistoric sites, which have already started counteracting the effects of climate change via the installation of shelters. Notwithstanding the task that was undertaken years ago, as my colleagues from the Prehistoric Sites Department can confirm, this is certainly not a closed case. Constant monitoring is being carried out by Heritage Malta and the University of Malta, specifically the Department of Conservation and Built Heritage, in order to assess the impact of these shelters. Our climate keeps changing, and we must keep an open mind that current solutions may also need to change in the future. Normally, when we think of climate change and cultural heritage, we immediately think of the way sites, especially outdoor ones, such as these which I have just mentioned, are affected. But it is far more encompassing than that, and I shall go over a few ideas of how cultural heritage can be used as a platform to raise more public awareness on this current threat, climate change. So, museums and climate change. Museums are already being used by people who want to have their voices heard with regards to sustainable development-related issues. On the 14th of October of last year, Just Stop Oil protesters threw cans of tomato soup on Vincent van Gogh's Sunflowers, the painting which is at London's National Gallery. And this was just one from a string of similar actions. Gustav Klimt Tod und Leben was also a target at the Vienna Museum in November 2022. Obviously, the museum staff are certainly not impressed by these actions. But even locally, we are not new to this. Our cultural heritage, especially our prehistoric sites, have also in the past been vandalized in order to pass messages to the authorities. That was me in the photo many moons ago. I had just started working at the Museum of Archaeology, and that's when I joined 1996, when it was vandalized to pass on a message with regards to hunting issues. But why is cultural heritage targeted by individuals? It has been argued that the targeting of cultural heritage is intended as an attack on the communities for which the heritage is an essential part of their unique cultural identity. So such activists or lobby groups hit where it really hurts. Cultural heritage managers should use similar logic without, of course, causing damage by using sites and museums to tackle current issues such as climate change. The International Council of Museums, ICOM, acknowledged and shared both the concerns expressed by museums regarding the safety of collections and the concerns of climate activists as we face an environmental catastrophe that threatens life on Earth. ICOM sees the choice of museums as a backdrop for these climate protests as a testament of their symbolic power and relevance in the discussions around the climate emergency. As there are around 55,000 museums in the world, their impact is probably comparable to that of a small country. Imagine the difference to the world if all museums committed to steadily enhancing their positive impacts and reducing their negative impacts. In order to realize their potential, museum networks and individual museum workers need to understand how they can contribute towards the sustainable development goals. But what exactly are these sustainable development goals that everyone keeps mentioning? The SDGs, as they are more commonly referred to, are the most ambitious global program ever, addressing a wide range of social and environmental challenges in order to set the world on a path to a sustainable future by 2030. The SDGs were unanimously agreed to by the 193 members of the United Nations in September 2015, and are explained in the publication which one can find online. It's called Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The SDGs are not just for governments or policymakers, just like I thought they were. They are an invitation to all sectors of society to collaborate and participate in the achievement of the 2030 Agenda. Museums and cultural heritage sites have a great deal to offer to this agenda, and some of the SDGs will not be achieved without museums. There is just not one single right way to contribute to the SDGs, so long as the principles of sustainability are followed. The SDGs are also not about continuing with business as usual, but about clear, committed, focused action to enhance positive impacts and reduce the negative ones. As we can see in the current slide, the 2030 Agenda is realized through 17 Sustainable Development Goals. These aim to address the greatest challenges facing society and the environment by 2030, and include ending poverty and bringing prosperity to all, social inclusion, environmental sustainability, and peace and good governance to all countries and all people. The 2030 Agenda is a plan of action for people, planet, and prosperity. It also seeks to strengthen universal peace and larger freedom. But how are the SDGs relevant to museums? There are mainly 7 activities which relate directly to museums and cultural heritage. We can see them here. They are to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage, both within museums and more generally, to support and provide learning opportunities in support of the SDGs, to enable cultural participation for all, support sustainable tourism, enable research, direct internal leadership, management and operations, and direct external leadership and collaboration. So the first action is to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage, both within museums and more generally. So heritage is whatever is passed from one generation to another and is strongly connected with the concept of sustainability. Cultural heritage generally includes artifacts, monuments, buildings, and sites that have a diversity of values to people. Natural heritage generally includes plants, animals, ecosystems, geological structures, and landscapes. Natural heritage is found in the wider environment, nature reserves, zoos, aquaria, and botanic gardens. Intangible cultural heritage is defined in the 2003 UNESCO Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage as practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, and skills, as well as instruments, objects, artifacts, and cultural spaces associated therewith, that communities, groups, and in some cases individuals recognize as part of their cultural heritage. Now, protecting and safeguarding cultural and natural heritage forms the basis of a direct and explicit SDG target, and that is SDG 11.4, which is specifically to strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. But how does one go about doing this, especially in view of the freak events which seem to be increasing? The first step is understanding the risks. There are 5 main risks which are related to climate change. And these are floods associated with extreme weather events, desertification, erosion, forest fires, and sea level rises. In order to understand the risks, we need to first map out all the cultural assets. I am aware that the superintendents of cultural heritage are currently carrying out such an exercise, which is based on a GIS platform, and which will definitely be a good baseline for such an exercise. This should then be linked with and in relation to any other existing maps of natural and man-made hazards or risks. The second step would be to prioritize monitoring of environmental parameters in relation to the heritage under threat, whether it is due to its building material, environmental exposure, tourism pressure, or cultural and socio-economic values. Such prioritization can only be viable if each and every site is risk assessed. The assessment criteria, however, needs to be the same throughout for all the sites. Once all the sites are prioritized accordingly, the action can then start. I know that this will probably sound very idealistic, since at times we end up firefighting, not literally, in order to prevent disasters. I do know, however, that many cultural heritage sites already have their own risk assessments. So this is a matter of putting our heads together and prioritizing, not just as an agency, but on a national scale. And for this, we need training. We need training to understand the vulnerability of the heritage. We need exercises, simulations, and risk reduction training, which will in turn prepare people to be able to respond in crisis situations. We also need training in the way we think, and this can at times be more challenging. We certainly need to change our current narrative from risk of loss, conservation backlog, gaps in data, gaps in research, vulnerable collections, to a new narrative which incorporates terminologies like 5,000 years of knowledge, opportunities, traditional materials. This is the only way in order to make the first steps towards trying to become truly sustainable. A Danish archaeologist, Jürgen Hollesen, who specializes in climatology, geochemistry, soil processes, and environmental impact modeling, said, and I quote, "In the face of accelerated climate change, the wider principle of conserving and preserving as much as possible seems increasingly unsustainable. We might arrive at a stage where we have to decide which sites to save and which to allow to decay. Let us all strive together to avoid this locally." The second activity is to support and provide learning opportunities. Museums are fundamental to the achievement of this target, along with other collection-based institutions, cultural sites, monuments, and natural heritage. However, as individual museums are part of wider museums, cultural and heritage sectors, all museums should consider how they support the world's cultural and natural heritage through their various activities, just to ensure that they are not inadvertently doing damage to forms of heritage beyond their immediate subject area. Target 11.4 is closely linked to this achievement of many other SDGs, because collections in museums serve as the basis for a wide range of activities, notably learning, which is SDG 4, and research and innovation, SDG 9. Just to give one particular example, for example, natural history collections in museums directly contribute to SDG 11.4, SDG 4, education, 9, research and innovation, but moreover, they can also contribute to SDG 2, which is sustainable agriculture, SDG 13, climate action, SDG 14, life and water, and SDG 15, life on land, by ensuring the protection and safeguarding of natural heritage in nature. Museums can also help to protect and safeguard cultural and natural heritage by providing opportunities for people to express, experience, and participate in expressions of their culture and the culture of others. And through this, we would be supporting SDG 10, which is reducing inequalities. They mainly contribute to the effective and sustainable use of their collections for education and research, and through exhibitions, events, and the other programs that they hold. The third activity is enabling cultural participation for all. Enabling cultural participation for all is enshrined in Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts, and to share in scientific advancements and its benefits. People should have the right to know, understand, visit, make use of, maintain, exchange, and develop cultural heritage and cultural expressions, as well as to benefit from the cultural heritage and cultural expressions of others. Museums can therefore bring people together from similar and different backgrounds and interests, promoting fair, tolerant, and just societies. We have made huge steps towards making museums more accessible, both physically and intellectually, to all members of the society, but we can definitely do more. The fourth activity is aimed at supporting sustainable tourism. Sustainable tourism has been defined as tourism that takes full account of its current and future economic, social, and environmental impacts, addressing the needs of visitors, the industry, the environment, and the host communities. Well-managed tourism can contribute positively to the three dimensions of sustainability, promoting and safeguarding the natural environment, and providing jobs and incomes to the communities. However, tourism can also have serious negative impacts, notably through greenhouse gas emissions from flying, that contribute to climate change, and where local communities' rights and heritage are not respected. The 2002 Cape Town Declaration on Responsible Tourism sets out a number of aims with regard to responsible tourism, which include making positive contributions to the conservation of natural and cultural heritage, providing more enjoyable experiences for tourists through more meaningful connections with the local people and a greater understanding of local culture, social and environmental issues, providing access for physically challenged people, and being culturally sensitive. The fifth activity is to enable research. Museum collections are a distributed research and knowledge infrastructure, preserved and developed for the long term and supporting a wide range of educational, research, and innovation-driven activities. Museums can support research in support of the SDGs in a number of ways, drawing on their collections, practices, and operations. They can help provide access to researchers to collections, whether for traditional, disciplinary, or novel approaches, and help communicate the results of research to their various audiences and stakeholders. Collections, collection facilities, and access to collection information needs to be developed to meet the needs of current and future researchers. They can help researchers and policymakers better understand how to achieve the SDGs through humanities and social science research. For example, by being a testbed to explore how people can be involved in policy development. They can support heritage science, which supports the protection, safeguarding, and sustainable use of cultural and natural heritage in museums. They can support developing countries to make effective use of collections. And last but not least, some museums will also undertake research themselves, and this could be directed towards the advancement of the SDGs, or even use the SDGs as a framework for communication and reporting. Direct internal leadership, management, and operations towards the SDGs is the penultimate activity. This can be translated into taking leadership and management decisions at all levels that applies the SDGs to the institution themselves and to the daily work of the staff. Management should support the SDGs, which ultimately enhance the human and environmental rights to those impacted by museums and their work. The last activity which directly links museums to the SDGs is direct external leadership, collaboration, and partnerships. Museums and museum workers regularly work in partnership across their own sectors and with other sectors. They have tremendous freedom in the partnerships and collaborations they develop and can direct their activity to building partnerships to better support the SDGs, and therefore contributing to a huge range of initiatives. These will enhance social and environmental outcomes and benefit all partners, including museums. When seen in this matter, as I explained it above, it may seem quite simple, but a number of museums lack confidence and at times the knowledge on how to work with the SDGs. A survey carried out in 2022 by NEMO clearly shows that museums are not prepared to take climate action. The survey found that despite 8 in 10 museums in Europe acknowledging climate change and sustainability as important strategic topics, only 1 in 4 were contributing to local or national sustainable policies. Lack of funding was identified as the main challenge, with only 2 in 10 museums using a green energy supplier, for example. Respondents also reported a lack of confidence in measuring their sustainable efforts. The report also found that only 1 in 10 museums surveyed were part of a cultural network that focuses on climate change. Those that were involved in networks reported being slightly more confident in their climate-related activities. Moreover, many museums still lack the ability and authority to make impactful decisions about their premises regarding infrastructure, energy supply, or alternative work methods. However, there are plenty of tools available to help us museum workers. There are ways of collecting and digitizing data, and there are model projects underway in many of the countries. The EU is playing its part through the European Coordinated Action Project, such as the FP7 Projects for Climate for Culture, and the EU Cultural Heritage Identity Card Scheme, and many different transnational Horizon 2020 projects. UNESCO is also playing its part through raising awareness, and professional bodies such as ICOMOS, ICROM, and ICOM have developed toolkits, training programs, and a number of useful publications, of which I am just showing a small sample. I myself have recently participated in a course called Our Collections Matter, which is a new initiative launched by ICROM in 2020 to increase and amplify activities that support sustainable development through the use, development, and conservation of heritage collections. It does so by adopting a 3T strategy: tools, training, and transformation. It provides the tools and training in order to help with the transformation. As a case study for this course, I undertook the reorganization of the reserve collection, and I will briefly explain the aim of this exercise. So basically, I decided to take this case study. We were working on the reserve collection. We were organizing it in a manner as to make it more accessible to the public. And through these SDGs and through the training, we realized that the aim was to, take these SDGs on board. So the main aim were society, mainly researchers, the environment. We tried to find alternative packing materials and to provide access by digitizing. The challenges were many. Lack of human resources, but through interns and students, and even MCOS students who are, doing their practicum with us. So I took them on board, and this helped in the education section, whereby basically they were learning what they were sort of being taught at school. They were doing hands-on. Another challenge was the lack of storage space. So I had loads of wooden boxes, sometimes with just a few artifacts in them. We are repacking in plastic containers. I haven't found an alternative to plastic containers, but through this course, I basically realized that sometimes you have to make do with what you have, just reuse and recycle. So we rebox things in a manner that we maximize the space in the reserve collection. Then there was the issue of loss of information. We were losing information, so we made sure that we digitize everything and even research the missing data. We also gathered all the artifacts which were in various rooms, and they basically are now stored according to site. So they're in alphabetical order. So if someone wants to come, and look for artifacts from the site of Attard, all we have to do is go to the A section and we'll find everything there. So through this exercise, I realized that I was sort of contributing to various SDGs, and the SDGs are here. SDG 1.4, providing access to collection as part of access to cultural property. SDG 4, quality education. I use this exercise to train staff, interns, and students. SDG 11.4, we already mentioned, it's the generic to protect and safeguard cultural heritage by planning policies and procedures. SDGs 12.3 and 12.5, sustainably reducing waste generation through prevention, recycling, and reusing. SDG 13.1 and 13.3, ensuring cultural heritage is cared for appropriately through management to address the risks from disasters and hazards. And SDG 16.10, to ensure public access to information related to the collections. We are also doing this via the documentation we are carrying out. This information will be integrated in the new collections management system that Heritage Malta has bought, and we are slowly inputting the data. There is still some work which needs to be done. It's basically continued digitization and have a full inventory of the whole collection, research material without provenance, establish policies and procedures, create a movement register, create a 6-monthly routine maintenance system, and continue researching to try to find alternative packing materials which are more environmentally friendly. Now, in order for museums and cultural heritage sites to be successfully used as platforms for public awareness on climate change, there is the need for multidisciplinary teamwork. This is not just the work of a curator or a conservator or the safety managers. Curators care for and develop collections and make them available and accessible in a sustainable way. Like I mentioned, we're currently working on our collections management system. Having an online collections management system even reduces transport emissions because, for example, a researcher doesn't even have to come on site to physically see the collections. As a side note, since I am mentioning digitization, let's not think that we always require a lot of high-tech equipment or experience in order to record something for posterity. An article I read recently, and on the bottom right-hand side of the slide, you can basically see the slide over there. It was an app created for the Ukrainian people. It was a mobile app. It's called Backup Ukraine. It was given freely to everyone in Ukraine. And all they had to do is go around with their mobile phone and scan monuments and basically places of interest, basically because they are at risk of being destroyed due to conflict. This is definitely a very good case of best practice when it comes to community involvement. Curators can also, of course, develop exhibitions which should reflect on the individuals and society's relationship with waste. We also need to think of the way temporary exhibitions are designed, ideally with recyclable and reusable materials. Museums and sites can be used as actual physical spaces to encourage constructive discussions. Sites and artifacts of cultural heritage, such as landscapes, archaeological sites, and historical buildings, can help to engage people in a dialogue on the historical dangers and risk of climate change, and how societies can adapt or fail to adapt to these. On the other hand, conservators can make distinctive contributions through caring for collections and making them available to support learning opportunities and cultural participation. They can also support research and can make a distinctive contribution through ensuring the chemicals and other resources they use as part of the conservation treatments are not harmful to the natural environment. Educators and staff working directly with visitors can create opportunities for people to encounter intangible cultural heritage and to take part in educational programs. As mentioned before, leaders and managers can support all the activities through the decisions they make in terms of providing financial and human resources and decisions made on the vision, mission, and programs of work. Marketing teams play a key role in promoting learning opportunities through ensuring that they promote cultural participation from all. promoting sustainable tourism, and communicating the museum's internal and external work in support of the SDGs. Financial and commercial teams, through their services they provide and the products they stock and sell, should ensure that museums are accessible in terms of economic and cultural considerations. And the maintenance team definitely plays a huge role in working towards reducing negative environmental impacts. As we have seen, museums as trusted institutions are committed to education with strong connections with their community and are in a unique position to preserve the past, inform the present, and shape the future. But life would be too easy and boring if there were no challenges, and we certainly do not lead a boring life. Challenges are abundant, but in my opinion, the biggest challenge we face is the lack of coordination and cooperation between policymakers. Collaboration between different entities and ministries is a must. The Sharm el-Sheikh Declaration, which was made in last November during COP27, urges governments to incorporate climate change in cultural policies. They pointed out that there is a total lack of coordination between and across European, national, and regional strategies. There is lack of alignment in the responsibility chain from policymaking to practical application, low priority of cultural heritage in risk management plan, and lack of integration of cultural heritage protection measures into risk management strategies. Now let's have a look at the local scenario. The National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy of Malta, which was adopted in 2012, provides a summary of the climate change impacts on specific domains and presents 72 actions that should be undertaken. The focus of the strategy is mainly on risks, financial impacts, identifying legal framework, sustainability, water, agriculture, human health, tourism, communication, and education. So I was curious, so I went on this document and I searched the document by entering the word culture. And I was, immediately pleasantly surprised. I saw 64 hits, only to realize it was bringing up the term agriculture. There was absolutely no mention of cultural heritage at all. In a much more recent document, which was launched late last year for public consultation, which is Malta's Sustainable Development Vision for 2015, cultural heritage is not mentioned either. In view of this, together with a colleague of mine, Ruben Abela, we drafted a two-pager, which was to be sent as an official recommendation from Heritage Malta. There were numerous strategic objectives within the document where we insisted that cultural heritage should be included. This is just one example. I will not go through it, but if you start reading the last paragraph, the word in both cultural heritage preservation and conservation is what we are suggesting needs to be included. It does mention nature conservation, climate change adaptation, land degradation, but cultural heritage did not feature anywhere. So, as you can see, sometimes we have to be proactive. We have to, sort of pull the ears of the policymakers, say, hey, cultural heritage needs to be there. Sometimes you get the response, oh, but there's tourism. Tourism is something which is completely different. On a positive note, the 2021 National Cultural Policy states that climate change is the foremost global challenge, and the National Cultural Policy acknowledges the contribution that arts and culture can make to tackle climate change and translate it into action. Not only are artists and the wider cultural community critical in advocating for change and shaping new ways of being, doing, and thinking, but their individual and collective actions are now even more crucial to address environmental sustainability. And here we have a number of initiatives that the NCP 2021 is suggesting are included as policies. They are also seeing that a commission is set up to ensure that by 2025, all feasts celebrated in Malta reduce the waste by at least 50%. Furthermore, all food and beverages served during feasts and outdoor activities have to be served in biodegradable containers, and each concession shall provide separation of waste at source. Apart from policies at governmental level, there are other challenges like lack of funding, lack of human resources, and the fact that most museums are in historic buildings which are not energy efficient. Historic buildings have more maintenance issues which add to the challenges like leaking roofs, old electrical and plumbing supplies, poor ventilation, and the list goes on. There is also the issue of energy crisis, which is a direct impact of climate change, supplemented with human intervention. The Museums Association director stated recently that the soaring cost of energy bills could be more of a risk to UK's museums than COVID-19 pandemic, since bills are forecasted to jump up by 500%. So we're out from one crisis, the pandemic, straight into another one. Most museums, those which haven't already closing up entirely, are still struggling to recover from COVID. Years of underinvestment have left the sector badly prepared for the energy crisis, and some museums are unable to cut down on their energy use. We have to also bear in mind that some collections need round-the-clock care. A survey by the Association of Independent Museums has shown that 1/5 of museums are considering reducing their opening hours, and 40% plan to scale down their activities to cope with the rising energy bills. Just as a note, post-COVID, even Heritage Malta had decided to reduce the opening hours and the opening days. But some of you might say, but she's talking about the UK. But let's not kid ourselves that such a scenario will not hit us too in the future, and therefore we must be prepared for it. If nothing else, COVID has dealt us with a huge lesson to be prepared. The pandemic forced us to examine the core function of our organization, become more agile, and refocus on the things essential to our existence. These are all important when considering how to adapt to climate change. Climate change is anthropogenic, which means that it's relating to or resulting from the influence of human beings on nature. But we need human solutions to solve this issue. These photos were taken in Krems, Austria, and the photo on the right shows plaques which are stuck on the wall, which show how much the river rose, and that's basically a wall. So the top one is how high the water went in 2002, and beneath it, it's 1954. On the top right-hand side is, you can see that there's a person and there's a sort of like a fence. So they have devised this solution, which takes hours to set up, which is basically a man-made fence, which stops the river from overflowing into the town and causing a lot of damage. As a conclusion, we need to reimagine museums for climate change. We should not just focus on preserving the past, but also learn from it in the hope of reshaping the future. Museums today are much more than simply storehouses for treasured artifacts. They are places for research, entertainment, and debate, and the work often extends far beyond their own walls. Climate change poses significant challenges to the way museums operate. Practices of collecting, conservation, exhibition making, and community engagement may all need to be rethought in times of rapid social and environmental change. What might museums look like in a world altered by rising seas and intense heat waves? How will they function and who will they serve? What role might they play in reconnecting nature and society, and in fighting the problems of climate change, inequality, and social change, and social justice? Before closing off and leaving you pondering on these questions, I would just like to end this presentation with a somehow positive note with regard to climate change and cultural heritage. Severe droughts brought about by climate change are bringing some archaeological wonders to the surface. In the summer of last year, the remains of a 3,400-year-old city emerged from a reservoir in Iraq after months of extreme drought. German and Kurdish archaeologists uncovered the ancient settlement from the Mitanni Empire when water levels rapidly fell. It was once located on the banks of the Tigris River and is believed to have been the city of Zakiku, an important center for the Mitanni Empire, which lasted from around 1550 to 1350 BC. And with this last slide, I end my presentation.
Well, thank you very, very much, Sharon. That was, to say it's thought-provoking, I think doesn't really cut it. So plenty of things to ponder on, as you've suggested that we should do. I think one of the things that comes across so vividly in what you've been saying is the idea that it's such a huge subject. I mean, it is an enormous subject, and it's got so many different facets to it that I think it's difficult to get your head round what sort of can be done about it, what actions can be taken. Obviously, you've suggested a few there, many in fact, but it's the idea that cultural heritage is in need of help because it's running risks and has enormous challenges, but that in some way it can also be helpful.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the messages at least I took from what you were saying. The other one, which is one very much dear to my heart, the idea of networks being so important with regard to people having the courage to get together, and sort of safety in numbers, in the sense that people can feel more courageous, possibly in a network than they would on their own.
And we also learn from each other because everyone has a contribution to make.
Absolutely, absolutely. One thing I'd like, before going into questions and things, one thing I'd like to do is perhaps could you go back to some of the earlier slides, for example, the one of the Roman villa, the Roman house, leisure house at Ramla, because there are some people who came in a little late to your talk and may have missed a couple of very, very interesting pictures. Yes, this one in particular, I think, is fascinating. And I think I'm right in saying that sort of the in the picture which is for us on our right hand side, the villa sort of continues up to where those dunes are. No.
Yes. Yes.
Uh-huh. And beyond. So
and there, as you can see, I mean, the stones are immersed in water, so there's,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the other ones, the other interesting ones were the collapse of the wall at Bigi, which is and as you said, it's your neck of the woods, so to speak.
Yes.
For Heritage Malta.
It's not going to be easy to repair because basically it's the rock which gave way. Yep. So we need to make sure that the rest of it doesn't doesn't happen again for the rest of it. So it's going to take a lot of funding to do that, but we'll.
And the other one was, I think, the Shrub Lajin, where the wall collapsed. I think that was I was thinking of the cliff collapse that comes a little there.
This is for Delimara.
Delimara, that was Delimara.
This is for Delimara. So in the 2010 image, you can see that there is this chunk of rocks in there, but in 2014 it just gave way. The rocks just gave way, and it's exposing obviously the fort more.
Yes, so. I mean, these are natural phenomena. We've had the collapse of the the As Your Window,
Yes.
but also the speed, because it's not just a natural phenomenon. It's also due to the speeding up of acid rain and other things which contribute to climate change that is going faster than would normally do if it weren't for our input, unfortunately, into the air. There are also a lot of problems, problematics. I've got a couple of things which I'd like to ask. Let me see in the chat. I was going to say that, for example, one example that I've touched with my own sort of experience is the Norfolk coast, the East Anglian coast in England, which is and has been for many hundreds of years sinking into the sea, and we've already lost quite well-known churches and little villages and that kind of thing. And when it comes to the decision about saving it, some areas they've made the decision to create these islands offshore, which mitigate the effect of the waves against the beaches. Other places where the decision has been made not to do anything. But in the case of Shrop Lajin, there's, I suppose, very little one could do actually to mitigate the effect of the wave on the cliff.
Definitely, but what is being done now is they are re-excavating the site, and then they will decide, because there's still a substantial part of the temple which is there, and then the decision will be made whether to relocate it a bit inwards. So, but first we have to excavate, and then the decisions will be made. But that is part of the plan.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
In the instances you mentioned, the only thing to do is for these places which are definitely going to be lost forever is document and digitize. At least you have, something which can still be seen.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And also, going back to the bigger questions like the CO2 travel tourism, the conundrum between wanting many tourists and the degradation that can happen from too many tourists as well. These are all very sensitive economic questions.
We don't really have a choice. People who want to visit Malta have to fly over, unless they come by cruise ship, which, as we all know, cruise liners don't help because of their emissions. So yes, it's not so easy, especially for islands like ours. I mean, because in our other places they can decide to travel by other means, which still trains and cars are still causing pollution and contributing to CO2s and stuff like that. But it's very difficult. I mean, I don't envy the policymakers and.
No, you have to can't please everybody. It was rather a disappointing COP27 report on what museums, the situation that museums find themselves in. Actually, it was a litany of, gosh, this is museums are finding themselves in an almost impossible situation. I think that was a bit disappointing, but perhaps it was a sort of shock treatment for people.
Yes, probably more. I would like to see it more as an eye opener than and maybe it hits the right people.
Yes, absolutely. Is there anybody in the audience this evening who'd actually like to say something? Anybody want to put their hand up, or because there are plenty of things to talk about. I was very impressed with your description of how you yourself and obviously your museum, National Museum of Archaeology, is really trying to do something to actually do look into ways in which you can sort of reduce the effects of climate change in many different ways.
We do intend even to have exhibitions with themes which deal with different aspects of climate change in the future as well.
I'm seeing here from Isabel Villa Gregory, I'm less concerned about the flights and more concerned about the trend to build loads of terrible hotels. That is a far bigger impact. It's not a problem for a heritage agency. The point is agencies need support from policymakers, and yeah, you've made that point as well. And Ginger Littlejohn is saying, Sharon, you have started assessing, have you started assessing which sites are more likely to fall victim to climate change and to prioritize them, sort of what to save and what to let go?
Well, yes, like I said, a number of our sites, we have already started carrying out a risk assessment. To put everyone's mind at rest, there are no sites which we are saying we're going to let go of these. We haven't arrived at that stage yet. But yes, each site is carrying out, especially the outdoor sites, is carrying out a risk assessment. But even museums and their collections, we are carrying out risk assessments on the different aspects. But there are other sites which do not fall under the remit of Heritage Malta, and this has to be a national thing.
Sure. One of the sites, of course, now Nidra and Hajaim and also Tarshin have been covered over, yes. Which obviously was very sad from our point of view as viewers and people who've studied it, studied those places, etc. But then I think we all sort of came to terms with that, really.
It's a necessary evil. It's a necessary evil, and we're monitoring the impact because even since they are World Heritage Sites, even from UNESCO, they keep asking for data because there are other sites abroad who would want to do something similar, but they're trying to gauge what the actual effects are. So, like I said, it's an ongoing process. The climate keeps changing, so we might need to think of alternatives in the future as well. Yes,
absolutely, and it's very interesting that it's been quite a long term. That's the cover over Hajaim has been there now. How many years?
I think more than a decade. 10, 12 years, something like that, yes.
So now you must be getting sort of results that can really give you and other people a really good idea of...
Yes. In fact, there's like I said, the university and Heritage Malta are constantly monitoring and producing data in that regard.
I think that I'm looking at comment really more than anything else here. Your Sikot on behalf of FAA. Thanks you for your informative presentation, and says one problem we encounter is in our work at protecting Malta's cultural and natural heritage is that governments of the day are custodians of our built stroke natural heritage. Yet these same governments of the day are under pressure by commercial interests. What is urgently required is a clause in our constitution allowing an NGO private citizen to sue a government at court of law to uphold its duty to protect our heritage against capitalist interests. A little off tangent, is admitting, but this is a concern that FAA has. I'm not expecting you to answer.
I'm not a legal person.
No, but you have actually said, I mean, it's an obvious point that a lot of control is in the hands of policymakers,
yes,
wherever they are, and that good decisions need to be made. Really,
it's up to us to point things out to them. Like I mentioned, that sustainable policy, cultural heritage was not mentioned, so we send them, a letter. It should be there. Sometimes it's something simple. I mean, when I was doing when I was on the focus group, the first thing they asked us was they wanted to know which national policies had culture and heritage as part of their agenda. I had absolutely no idea. So I called up the Ministry of Environment and I asked for a contact person. They gave me the policies. They kept insisting that cultural heritage was there because there was the word tourism, and I explained to them. One thing led to the other. Before I know it, they contacted me because they had this project. The Ministry of Environment had a project in which cultural heritage had to form part of it. So they came to us to form part of this project. And we're still waiting for the final result, but if it goes through, we'll have a pilot project for the National Museum of Archaeology to conduct monitoring and implement passive ways in order to make the building more sustainable and more environmental friendly. So sometimes it's just a matter of making the first step.
Yeah, absolutely. And making points which perhaps to you as a professional are pretty obvious. Very often to people who are actually involved in the policies, they are not obvious at all.
Exactly.
Well, unfortunately, I think at this point, I have to bring this interesting discussion to a close. Thank you all so very much for participating in this evening's event. We look forward to seeing you all again next time, when Dr. Dennis Mitzi, Senior Lecturer in Hebrew and Ancient Judaism at the University of Malta, will deliver a talk entitled A Late Medieval Synagogue at Hukok, stroke Yakok, in Galilee, two different pronunciations, obviously. That will be on 15th March at the usual 6 p.m. Malta time. Anybody interested in joining the ASM, please do so through our website at archsoc.org.mt. You'll be supporting the Society in its lecture program and peer-reviewed journal, and also in its advocacy work in support of all things archaeological in Malta. Sincere thanks from the ASM and the Department of Classics and Archaeology, University of Malta, to Sharon Sultana this evening for her talk tonight, which I'm sure you will all agree has raised some very serious and stimulating issues. A very good night to you all, and thank you again.